The colonel had me out of the chair before I finished the timing I was checking. It was somewhere on the far side of 3 a.m, in the windowless part of the night when a headquarters stops pretending to be a building and becomes only the sum of its screens. The operations center was awake in the way a place gets awake when it has been told to be somewhere it is not yet. Cooling fans running hard behind the wall of monitors. The low churn of a dozen radios held at a whisper, a map of a dying city thrown 20 feet wide across the front of the room, its edges marked with the little moving shapes that were, if you knew how to read them, 11,000 people who did not yet know whether they would live. I had a folder open on the table and a tablet in my hand and 9 months of work in my spine, and I had made it exactly to the last refuel window on the northern corridor when a hand closed on my elbow and lifted. "Somebody get the coffee girl out of the command chair," the colonel said. "The grown-ups are briefing in 10. I did not spill anything because I have spent 20 years learning how not to spill things when men decide to move me. But it was close, and the closeness was the point. He wanted me up and out and small. He was a big man, a full colonel by the eagles on his uniform, maybe 50, with the particular certainty of a man who has just arrived somewhere and has already decided he understands it. I had met 1,000 of him. Some of them had taught me things. Most of them had only taught me patience. "Colonel," I said, and I kept my voice flat and low, the voice you use when you would like a situation to get smaller instead of larger. I was setting the final timings for the brief. "I'm sure you were." He did not look at the folder. He looked at my plain field uniform, my unremarkable boots, the coffee cup somebody had left near my elbow that was not even mine, and he did the arithmetic that men like him do in half a second and are proud of for the rest of their careers. "There's a chair by the wall for notes, sweetheart. Try to keep up." Behind him, a knot of staff officers who had come in with him laughed. Not all of them. The ones who did not know me. There is always a sound a room makes when it decides who is important and who is furniture, and I have heard it enough times to know it before it arrives. A young major near the door half rose from his seat and then did not, because he was 32 years old and the colonel was a colonel, and the whole architecture of a headquarters is built to make a junior officer doubt his own eyes. I could have said my rank. People always ask me later why I did not just say it, and I understand the question. I do. I could have said the words, Lieutenant Colonel, and let them land. Part of me, the tired and human part that had been awake for 20 hours, wanted to. But I have learned something across 2 decades that is hard to explain to anyone who has not lived inside it, which is that when a man has already decided who you are, saying the true thing does not correct him. It hands him something to argue with. He would have wanted to see my card, and then found a reason it was not enough. And the young ones would have watched their colonel win, and the clock on the wall would have kept falling toward launch the whole time, indifferent to all of us. So I did the thing that 20 years had taught me was actually strong. I did nothing. I let him steer me out of the chair by the elbow, 3 steps to the wall, and I set my folder square on the little side table there, and I straightened my jacket, and I said not one word. The countdown clock above the big map read 2 hours and 40 minutes. It did not care where I was standing, neither in the end did I. The plan did not live in that chair. It lived in my head, and it was already moving. "There we go," the colonel said, satisfied, turning back to the room as if he had tidied something. "Now, who can tell me the concept of operations?" Nobody answered him, which he took for deference. It was not deference. It was that the only person in the room who could have told him the concept of operations was standing against the wall with her folder, keeping her mouth shut, watching a fuel state on a screen he did not know how to read. Let me tell you who was standing against that wall, because the colonel never asked, and that is the whole story really. Nobody ever asks. My name is Claire Bannister, and in the year all of this happened, I was 42 years old and a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. And my job, the actual job, the one printed on the order in the folder he would not look at, was to build the machine that moves people out of a place before it kills them. I am a planner. I know that word lands soft in a world that loves hard words. When people picture the army, they picture the rifle and the ramp and the young man running toward the sound. And all of that is real and all of that matters, but none of it happens by accident. Before the young man runs anywhere, someone sat in a quiet room for 9 months and decided which road, at which hour, behind which aircraft, with which fuel, under whose cover, with what happening if the road closes. That someone was me. I had been that someone for 20 years. The thing on the 20-foot map with the little moving shapes had a name. We called it Operation Lantern, And it was the plan to pull an embassy and a city's worth of our people and our friends out of a capital that had roughly a day left before the roads south went dark for good. 11,240 souls on the manifest that morning, and a single ribbon of airspace to thread them through, and a tide of windows opening and closing across the night like a lock system on a river, each one timed to the minute against fuel and darkness and the movements of people who wished us harm. I had built the sequencing, I had built the corridor, I had built the branch plans for when the corridor failed. Because corridors always fail, that is the one thing you can promise. I had lived inside this operation so long that I dreamed in it. Some nights I woke up already solving it, none of which the colonel could see because none of it looks like anything. That is the part I had made my peace with. Mostly, competence is invisible. It does not have a haircut. It does not walk into a room looking like what people think it should look like. It just gets 11,000 people onto aircraft in the dark and lets everyone else decide afterward, over coffee, that it had probably been going to work out all along. I had learned to live in that shadow. What I had never quite learned to live with was being told, by men who could not have found the fuel state on that screen with both hands, that the shadow was all I was. I should tell you about my father, because he is standing in this story even though he has been dead for 8 years, and because if you understand him, you will understand why I did not say my rank, and why later, when I could have burned a man down to the boots, I chose not to. My father was Colonel Walter Bannister, United States Army Infantry, 30 years, and he was the finest man I ever knew, and he never once understood what I did for a living. He loved me. I want to be clear about that, because it is easy to tell this kind of story as if the wound came from cruelty, and it did not. The wound came from love with a blind spot in it. My father believed all the way down to the floor of himself that the real army was the one holding the rifle. Everything else was support. Support was honorable, the way he saw it, the way you honor the people who bring the ammunition. But it was not the thing. The thing was the man at the front. I made Major the year I turned 31, and I made it on the back of a plan. There had been another evacuation, a smaller one, years before Lantern, a fast and ugly thing in a place I will not name, and I was the one who wrote the sequencing that got several hundred people out through a window that everyone senior to me had said was too narrow to use. It worked. It worked because I had argued for the narrow window until people stopped arguing back, and because when the wide window closed, as I had told them it would, we already had somewhere to go. A general briefed that operation afterward as though he had dreamed it himself. My name was on page 1 of the order, in the block where the planner's name goes, and no one read it aloud, and no one ever does. I did not mind the shadow. I have told you that. I only minded, a little, when I called my father to tell him I had made the promotion list, and he said he was proud of me, and then he said, "See, Claire, even the desk gets its due sometimes." He meant it kindly. That is the part that took me years to forgive. He died 3 years later, still believing that sentence had been a compliment, and I let him, because it was the last easy thing I could give a dying man, and because I had finally understood that his blind spot was not going to heal, and that loving him meant loving it too. Let me tell you about that first evacuation, the one that made me a major, because it is the seed of everything that happened in that operation center, and because it is the clearest example I have of the thing I do and why it is invisible. I was 31. The place does not matter, and I would not name it if it did. What matters is the shape of it, which is the shape these things always have. A city coming apart faster than anyone at the top had planned for, a few hundred of our people and our friends inside it, and a single road out that everyone senior to me wanted to run in one big convoy in the afternoon when the light was good and the plan looked tidy on a map. I was the most junior person in that planning cell by a decade, and I sat in the back, and I did the thing that has made me useful my whole career and unpopular for stretches of it, which is that I did the arithmetic that nobody wanted to hear. The afternoon convoy did not survive contact with the arithmetic. The road narrowed at a bridge, and a single convoy would stack up at that bridge, and an afternoon crossing meant crossing in daylight where daylight helped the wrong people. I said all of that, quietly, twice, and got waved off twice, because I was a captain with a whiteboard, and the plan was already briefed up the chain, and nobody rebuilds a briefed plan to please a captain. So I did the only thing you can do when you are junior and right, which is that I built the other plan, anyway, on my own time, the ugly, staggered night plan that nobody asked for, and I kept it in my folder, and I hoped I would never need it. We needed it. Of course we needed it. The afternoon window closed early and hard, exactly the way I had said it would, and there was a terrible half-hour in that cell where the tidy plan died on the bridge and the senior officers stood over the map with no next move, and I opened my folder. We got several hundred people out that night, staggered, in the dark, across a bridge in a sequence I had built for a contingency everyone had told me was a waste of a whiteboard. Not one of those people ever knew my name. They should not have to. That is not modesty. That is the actual design of the thing. A good evacuation feels to the people being evacuated like a line that moved. They never see the 9 months or the folder or the captain in the back who did the arithmetic nobody wanted. A general briefed it afterward. He was a good man, and he did not steal anything on purpose. He simply stood at the front of the room and said, "we," in a way that meant I, the way senior officers do without noticing, and my name sat in the planner's block on page 1 of the order, unread, the way it always does. I made major off that operation, which is to say the Army rewarded me correctly and quietly, in the currency it uses for people like me, which is rank and never recognition. I told you I made my peace with the shadow. I did. The shadow is not the wound. The wound is the sentence. The wound is a good man, my own father, hearing that his daughter had made the promotion list on the back of a night that saved hundreds of lives, and finding in his own heart only the words, "Even the desk gets its due." The wound is that the world had a whole category ready for me before I ever walked into a room, and the category was furniture, and no amount of being right in the dark ever moved me out of it, in the daylight, because the category was not about me. It was never about me. It was about what the loud parts of an institution decide to see. I learned to stop trying to argue my way out of the category. It cannot be done from inside a single conversation. You cannot say the words, "I am not furniture," and have anyone believe you, because that is exactly what furniture would say. You can only build the thing and set it down on the table and wait for the night to get hard enough that the room has no choice but to see what has been holding it up the whole time. So when a colonel called me the coffee girl and put me against a wall, I was not hearing a stranger. I was hearing an old familiar voice, wearing a new face, and I had already made my peace, a long time ago, with the fact that I was never going to argue my worth into a room. I was only ever going to build it and set it down on the table and let it speak when it was ready. It was almost ready. 2 hours and 30 minutes now, on the clock. I opened my folder against the wall and tucked, in its corner where I always kept it, a small worn photograph of a man in an old uniform, and I checked the northern corridor one more time, and I waited for the room to find out what it was actually holding. Here is the thing about being underestimated that people who have never lived it do not know. It gives you a clear view. When you are the most important person in a room, everyone performs for you, and you never see anyone as they actually are. When you are furniture, the room forgets to perform, and you see everything. Standing against that wall, invisible, I could read the whole operations center like the planet was. I could see the 2 young captains at the fusion desk who had, at some point in the last 20 minutes, misset a refuel window on the southern route, sliding a tanker's on-station time 15 minutes late without catching that it would strand the 3rd lift with nothing to drink. Nobody had noticed. The colonel certainly had not noticed. He was still at the front of the room asking people to tell him the concept of operations in a voice that expected applause. I did not raise my hand and announce the error because announcing it would have started a fight about who I was to be announcing anything, and the tanker did not care who was right. I simply opened the shared timeline on my tablet, corrected the on-station time, left a 1-line note in the log so the crew would see the why and not just the what, and pushed it back to the fusion desk. I watched one of the young captains blink at his screen as the corrected number arrived from nowhere, frown, check it, understand it, and quietly fix his own display to match. He never knew where it came from. That is the job. The job is not being seen to save the lift. The job is saving the lift. Ma'am. Captain Theo Marsh had crossed the room to the wall without my seeing him, which told me something, because I always see people cross rooms. He was 29, and he was my action officer, and he was, that morning, more upset on my behalf than I had been on my own. He is a good officer, Marsh, one of the ones who is going to be far better than good if the Army does not grind the care out of him first, and he had watched a colonel haul his boss out of a chair by the elbow, and he did not have 20 years of practice at swallowing it. His jaw was tight. His voice was low and careful, the way you talk when you are furious and trying to be a professional about it. Ma'am, that's Colonel Whitlock. He checked in from higher this morning. 0600 yesterday, actually, straight off the aircraft. He hasn't. He doesn't. Marsh stopped and started again. He doesn't know who you are. I know, I said. Do you want me to? No. I said it gently because the offer under the question was a kind one, and because a good leader does not spend a young officer's outrage on her own comfort. I don't want you to do anything, Theo. I want you to set the first slide, check the manifest count one more time, and make sure the liaison net is up. Let the work tell him. It always does. It's more patient than we are. He looked at me for a second, and I watched him decide to trust me, which is its own small act of courage in a young officer, to trust the quiet answer over the loud one. The count's holding at 11,240, he said. Liaison net is green. First slide's up whenever you are. Then we're ready, I said. Go stand where you can see the boards. When this starts moving, I'm going to need your eyes, not your anger. He went. I looked at the clock. 2 hours and 22 minutes. And I thought, the way you think a thing you have thought 1,000 times and still have to think again, that the hardest discipline in the whole army is not the kind they can see. It is standing against a wall with the answer in your hand and waiting for the right moment to set it down. And not 1 second before, the right moment, as it turned out, was about to walk through the door. You always hear a general before you see him because you hear the room change. There is a sound a headquarters makes when the commander arrives, and it is not a loud sound. It is the opposite. It is a sudden subtraction of sound, the scrape of chairs and the intake of breath, and then a silence with a spine in it. I heard it start at the back and roll forward. Colonel Whitlock heard it too, and I watched him square his shoulders and set his feet, and I understood exactly what he was thinking because it was written on him. He was thinking that the boss had arrived and that this was his moment, freshly checked in, to run a crisp brief and make a strong first impression on the man who signed his evaluations. Room! Attention! Someone called, and we all came to our feet, me included, against my wall, folder in hand. Lieutenant General Marcus Denholm came through the door the way old commanders do, without hurry, taking the temperature of the place in one slow pass of his eyes. He was 57, lean, gray, with a face that had been reading rooms for 35 years and had stopped being surprised by any of them. Behind him came his command sergeant major, a formidable woman named B. Trumbull, who I had known for a decade and who caught my eye across the room and gave me nothing, not a flicker, because she was better at this than any of us. Denholm carried nothing but a coffee, and he set the coffee down on the front table next to my open folder, and he looked at the 20-foot map of the dying city, and then he looked at Colonel Whitlock, who had stepped forward smartly into the center of the room. Sir, Whitlock said. Good morning. We're set. I'll walk you through the concept of operations. Denholm did not answer him. He did not say good morning, and he did not say no, and he did not say anything at all to the colonel standing in the middle of his operations center offering to run his brief. He simply let the offer sit there, unclaimed, in the air, and he reached down to the table and picked up the operation order that was lying open beside his coffee, the thick-bound document that governed every timing and corridor and fallback of Operation Lantern, and he turned it to the front page, and he found the block near the top where the planner's name is printed and never read, and he read it. Operation Lantern, he said, and his voice was quiet and it went all the way to the back wall. Ground scheme, air corridor, sequencing, timing, and branch plans, authored and owned by Lieutenant Colonel Claire Bannister. He let that hang for exactly as long as it needed to hang. Then he lifted his head and looked, for the first time since he had entered, directly at me, standing against the wall by the note-taker's table, where a colonel had put me 20 minutes before. Colonel Bannister built this, Denholm said, to the room, not to me. She'll walk us through it. Everyone else, sit down and listen. There was a sound in the room then, small, a single indrawn breath, and it came from Colonel Whitlock. I heard him say it, under his breath, not meaning to say it out loud, the way a man says a thing when the floor of his understanding drops out from under him. I don't believe it, he said. I stepped off the wall. I picked up my folder from the little side table, and I walked to the head of the room, past the command chair I had been lifted out of, and I did not look at Whitlock as I passed him, because there was nothing in his face that I needed, and nothing on mine that I wanted to spend. I set my folder on the front table next to the general's coffee. I picked up the clicker. 2 hours and 18 minutes on the clock. Good morning, I said to the room. Let's talk about how we get 11,000 people home. I did not raise my voice because I did not have to. This is the thing about a plan you have actually built, as opposed to a plan you have merely read. You do not perform it. You inhabit it. Every officer in that room had a slide deck. I did not need the slides. The slides were for them. I could have briefed Operation Lantern in the dark, walking backward, because I had not been handed it, I had grown it, hour by hour, over 9 months, and I knew where every joint was and why. So I walked them through it. I showed them the shape of the night. I showed them the northern corridor, the ribbon of airspace we had negotiated foot by foot, and why it opened when it did, keyed to darkness and to the last of the fuel, and to the movements of people who did not want us there. I showed them the sequencing, the order the lifts would go in, and why it was that order, and not the order that looked more efficient on paper. Because the order that looks efficient on paper strands families on a runway when a window slips, and windows always slip. I showed them the branch plans, the ugly cousins of the main plan, the ones people had called excessive in the planning cell 9 weeks ago, the what-ifs for when the corridor went hot and we had to bend the whole machine sideways without breaking it. People ask me why we built 4 branch plans for a single corridor, I said. We built 4 because we will use at least one. I don't know which one yet. Neither does anyone in this city who is trying to close that corridor on us. But when it happens, and it will happen tonight, I do not want us inventing the answer with families sitting on a runway. I want us reaching for a plan we already rehearsed. Speed on the night is just preparation spent. One of the young captains at the fusion desk, one of the 2 who had misset the tanker window earlier, raised a hand partway through, tentative. The way you raise a hand when you have just watched your boss get thrown out of a chair and you are no longer certain what the rules of the room are. Ma'am, he said, the Eastern Hook orbit. It puts 2 lifts loitering for up to 40 minutes outside the main corridor. That's 40 minutes of fuel we're spending on aircraft that aren't moving anybody. In the planning reviews, people flagged it as waste. I flagged it as waste, ma'am. I'm asking so I understand it, not to challenge it. It was a good question, and it was an honest one, and I have always believed that the honest question asked in front of the whole room is worth more than an hour of private study. So I answered it the way it deserved. You were right to flag it, Captain, and I want the whole room to hear why it stays in anyway, I said. Loitering fuel looks like waste on a spreadsheet because a spreadsheet measures fuel. It does not measure the thing we are actually protecting, which is optionality. Those 2 lifts on the Eastern Hook are not there to move people faster. They are there so that when something closes, and something always closes, we have aircraft already airborne and already positioned outside the threat, ready to become whatever the night needs them to be. You do not buy that on the night. There is no time to buy it on the night. You buy it in advance, in fuel, and you pray you wasted the money. Tonight we are going to be very glad we wasted the money. Keep asking questions like that. The officer who asks why the expensive fallback is in the plan is the officer I want building the next one. The captain nodded slowly, and I watched something happen in his face that I have watched happen in 100 young faces over the years, which is the moment a person stops seeing planning as paperwork and starts seeing it as a kind of care, the most patient kind, the kind that spends months protecting strangers from a bad half hour those strangers will never know they were saved from. I felt the room change while I talked, not because of anything I did to it, because of the work. The staff officers, who had chuckled at the elbow 20 minutes before, were leaning forward now, taking notes. And the 2 young captains at the fusion desk were watching me the way you watch someone do a thing you did not know could be done. And Colonel Whitlock was sitting very still, in a chair against the side wall, in the exact posture of a man rebuilding, from the studs, his entire understanding of the last half hour. I did not look at him. I want to be honest and say I felt him there the way you feel weather. But I did not look. I walked them through the branch plans last, all 4 of them, the ugly cousins, in order. I made them say the trigger for each one back to me, out loud, so it would live in their mouths and not just on a slide, because a plan you have only read is a plan you will fumble at 3 a.m, and a plan you have spoken is a plan your hands will reach for before your mind catches up. Branch 1 for a southern closure. Branch 2 for a communications loss. Branch 3 for a northern corridor going hot. Branch 4 for the worst of them, the one I do not like to talk about, the one for when the ground convoy to the airfield gets cut. We said them together, the whole room, like a catechism. And some of the officers looked faintly embarrassed to be reciting, and I did not care, because I have buried the cost of rooms that were too dignified to rehearse. And then, 40 minutes into the brief, with the clock reading 1 hour and 38 minutes to launch, the night did the thing I had promised the room it would do. Major Nolan Fry came off the liaison net with a runner's speed and a runner's face, and he did not wait to be recognized. Ma'am, he said, we've lost the northern corridor. It just went hot. Reporting surface-to-air activity along the whole northern ribbon in the last 4 minutes. The spine of the plan is gone. The room made a sound. You would have made it too. Every timing I had just walked them through hung on that corridor, and the corridor was, as of 4 minutes ago, a place we could no longer fly 11,000 people through. I have been in enough of these rooms to know the two things that happen next, the competent thing and the loud thing. They almost never come from the same person. The loud thing came first. It came from Colonel Whitlock, and I understood it, even as it was wrong, because a man who has just been humiliated in front of his new commander is desperate to be useful, and desperation is the enemy of judgment. He stood up. "Then we surge south," he said. "All of it. Everything onto the southern route right now. Push it all through before they can close that one too. Sir, we can still make the timeline if we move now." "We cannot enough," I said. I said it quietly, and I said it to the whole room, and not to him. And I turned back to the map. If we surge everything south at once, we stack aircraft over a single point with a single tanker track, and the third lift arrives with nothing to refuel from, because the southern tanker window was never built to carry the whole operation. We strand the last 4,000 people on the ground when the sun comes up. I know it feels like speed. It is the opposite of speed. It is all of us arriving at the bottleneck at the same time. Whitlock's jaw worked. Then what? And here is where 20 years of shadow paid for itself, because I did not have to think. I already knew. "We go to branch plan 3, I said. We staggered it for exactly this. 2 lifts stay north and hold on the eastern hook, out of the threat ring, until the fires teams suppress the northern activity. Everyone else transitions to the southern route, but sequenced, not surged, on the timing we rehearsed 9 weeks ago, so the tanker can service each lift in turn. It costs us 40 minutes. 40 minutes buys us all 11,000 instead of 7. I will take that trade every night of my life." I looked at Lieutenant General Denholm for the first time since I had begun. It is his operation. It is always the commander's operation, in the end, whoever built it. He had been standing at the side with his coffee, watching, and he had let the whole exchange happen without a word, the way good commanders do, letting the room show him who could think. Now he set the coffee down. "Do it her way," he said. "Branch 3, Colonel Bannister has the fight." 4 words. Colonel Bannister has the fight. I had waited my whole career to hear a sentence like that said out loud, in a room, with witnesses. And now that it had arrived, I did not have 1 second to feel it, because Branch 3 was mine, and it was about to be tested with 11,000 real people. And if I had built it wrong, they were going to pay for it, not me. I want to tell you what it cost to say yes to that, because it would have been easier, in a way, to stay in the shadow. In the shadow, when a plan works, someone else takes the credit. But when it fails, the shadow protects you too. You were only the planner. You only wrote it. Somebody senior chose to run it. There is a warm and cowardly safety in never being the name on the decision. I stepped out of that safety on purpose. I turned to Major Frey and I said, "Log the transition to Branch 3 under my authority. My name, my call. If this goes wrong tonight, it goes wrong on me, not on the crews flying it and not on the general who trusted it. Write it down that way." And I watched Frey write it down that way, and I felt the weight of it settle onto my shoulders where it belonged, and it did not feel like fear. It felt like the first honest thing I had done in 20 years. For 2 decades, I had signed orders that no one read aloud. This one I signed where everyone could see. Then I did the actual work, which is never the dramatic part. I turned to my people. I gave Captain Marsh the eastern hook and the 2 holding lifts and told him to talk to those crews himself, in his own voice, calm, so that 400 families circling in the dark heard confidence and not improvisation. I gave the fusion desk the tanker resequencing, and I stood over their shoulders for 90 seconds while they said it, because the first 90 seconds of a branch plan is where it lives or dies. I put the fires coordination on the liaison net and got the northern threat handed to the people whose job it was to suppress it. I did all of this in a flat, unhurried voice, spelling out every time and every call sign because a scared room speeds up and a good leader slows it down. "Eastern hook lifts, this is the floor," Marsh said into his handset, steady, and I could have hugged him for how steady it was. "Hold your orbit. You are exactly where the plan wants you. 40 minutes and we bring you home first." The first 2 lifts peeled off the dead northern corridor and turned onto the eastern hook, out of the threat ring, and began to hold. On the 20-foot map, the little shapes that were aircraft that were people bent away from the red and settled into the orbit I had drawn for them on a whiteboard 9 weeks earlier, while a room full of people told me I was planning for a problem that would probably never come. The room went quiet, watching the icons move, even Whitlock, especially Whitlock, and the clock kept falling. The next 90 minutes were the longest and quietest of my professional life, and there is almost nothing to describe about them, which is exactly the point, because the whole art of what I do is to make the most dangerous night of 11,000 lives look, from the floor, like a slow morning of people reading numbers off screens. There is no music in a real operations center. There is no shouting if you have done your job, because shouting is what a room does when it did not prepare. There is only the low back and forth of the nets, the crews calling their positions, the fusion desk marking each lift as it passed a checkpoint, and the count. Always the count. I had a running tally on the board to my left, and I watched it the way you watch a heart monitor over someone you love, and I made myself breathe. This is the part of the job that no one who has not done it can understand, and it is the part that ages you. Everyone imagines the danger is loud. The danger is not loud. The danger is a number on a board that has stopped moving for 90 seconds, and the 90 seconds where you do not yet know whether it stopped because a crew is busy or because a crew is gone. It is holding a face of complete calm for a room full of people who are reading your face for permission to panic, while inside your own chest, a plan you built is being tested against the real world one aircraft at a time, and you cannot touch any of it anymore because the time for building is over, and now you can only watch the thing you built and find out if you were good enough. I thought about the people on the manifest, which is a thing I try not to do during, because it does not help and it can hurt. But at 3 a.m, with the count paused, you think about them anyway. 11,240 is not a number when you have read the manifest. It is a woman who works in the embassy motor pool and her 3 children. It is an interpreter who has been waiting 2 years and a folder of paperwork for a seat on an aircraft. It is a man who fixed our generators for a decade and whose name is on a list that would cost him his life if the wrong people found it. I had built the sequencing that decided, in effect, the order in which those specific human beings would leave the ground, and there is no way to do that job honestly without understanding that the abstraction on the board is made of faces, and no way to do it well without setting the faces down, gently, for the length of the operation so your hands stay steady. You pick them back up afterward. You always pick them back up afterward. That is the tax. The number moved again. Lift 3, full and clear. I let out a breath I had been holding for a minute and a half, and beside me, Major Frey did the same, and neither of us said anything about it, because you do not. But we had both been holding it, and we both knew. The Northern Fires teams did their work, and 40 minutes in, the top of the ribbon cooled enough. Marsh brought his 2 holding lifts down off the eastern hook and threaded them home first, exactly as he had promised those 400 families, and his voice never once climbed. On the southern route, the tanker serviced each lift in turn, in the order I had rehearsed the room into their bones, and no aircraft arrived at the bottleneck to find nothing to drink, because we had not surged, because we had staggered, because a plan is a living thing, and you keep it alive by refusing to panic on its behalf. The Northern Fires teams did their work, and 40 minutes in, the top of the ribbon cooled enough. Marsh brought his 2 holding lifts down off the eastern hook and threaded them home first, exactly as he had promised those 400 families, and his voice never once climbed. On the southern route, the tanker serviced each lift in turn, in the order I had rehearsed the room into their bones, and no aircraft arrived at the bottleneck to find nothing to drink, because we had not surged, because we had staggered, because a plan is a living thing, and you keep it alive by refusing to panic on its behalf. The lifts came home one at a time. Each one reported the same way, a checkpoint, a count, a clear. Lift 1, full and clear. Lift 2, full and clear. I marked them. The number on my left ticked up in blocks of a few hundred souls, and each block was a runway somewhere that was now empty of people who, an hour before, had been standing on it in the dark, not knowing. At 3 minutes past 6 in the morning, with the first gray of the sun starting to gray the edges of the map, the last aircraft cleared the northern corridor as it closed behind them for good. Major Frey said the words into the quiet room. Last lift is feet wet and clear. That's all of them. The corridor is closed. I looked at the count on the board. 11,240. Every window I had argued for. Every fallback they had called excessive. The narrow orbit on the eastern hook that a room had told me was a waste of a whiteboard. All of it, spent exactly once, exactly when it was needed, and all of it enough. "That's the operation," I said. My voice did not shake, because it never does at the end. It only shakes later, alone, in the car. 11,240, everyone on the manifest is out. Get me the crew accountability and let's start the recovery checklist. For a moment, nobody in that room moved, and then the room did the thing that rooms do when a hard thing has just come out right, which is that it exhaled all at once, a single long breath, and a couple of the young officers put their faces in their hands. And Command Sergeant Major Trumbull, standing at the general's shoulder, closed her eyes for exactly 1 second and then opened them. All business again. Lieutenant General Denholm stood up. He walked to the front of the room, and he did not look at me. He looked at the staff, at the young captains and the majors and the colonel sitting against the wall, and he said it plainly, for the record and for the room, and for the 2 young captains who were going to remember this morning for the rest of their careers. "That," he said, "is what an operation looks like when the right person builds it. Every one of you just watched a plan bend at the worst possible moment and not break, because the woman who wrote it built the bend 9 weeks ago and made you rehearse it when you thought it was a waste of time." He paused. "Remember the name. Bannister. When you are colonels and someone in a plain uniform is sitting in the chair doing the quiet work, you remember this morning before you open your mouth." I did not say anything. There was nothing to say to that. And anyway, the recovery checklist was not going to run itself. But I saw Colonel Whitlock stand up from his chair against the wall, and I saw him wait, off to the side, near the door, in the posture of a man who has something to say and has decided to say it no matter what it cost him. He waited until the room was busy, until I stepped away from the front table to check the crew accountability, and then he came to me and he stood in front of me, and he was not a big man anymore. He was just a tired colonel who had gotten something badly wrong in front of everyone who mattered to him. "Colonel Bannister," he said. His voice was low. "I owe you an apology, and I don't have words big enough for the size of it. What I did this morning, what I said." He stopped. He made himself finish. "I have been in this army 26 years, and I have never been more wrong about a person in a single sentence. I'm sorry." I looked at him for a moment. I had a lot of choices in that moment, and I want to tell you honestly that some of them were mean, and that the mean ones were available and easy, and I could have picked one, and the whole room would have understood. I had earned every one of them. I did not pick a mean one. I will tell you why in a minute. "Not here," I said. "Walk with me. The checklist can spare 2 minutes. I will tell you why I did not burn him down, and it goes back to my father and to a thing I had been slow to learn. For most of my career, when I imagined this moment, the moment when one of the men who had dismissed me finally understood exactly who I was, I imagined it as a kind of victory. I imagined the pleasure of it. And then, that morning, it arrived. And I stood in front of a humiliated colonel with the whole room at my back and the general's words still in the air, and I discovered that the pleasure was not there. What was there instead was something quieter and much older and much more useful, because I had spent my whole life inside the exact mistake this man had just made. My father made it every day, out of love. 100 senior officers had made it, out of laziness, and it had never, not once, been about me personally. That was the thing it had taken me 20 years to understand. Colonel Whitlock had not looked at Claire Bannister and decided she was worthless. He had looked at a plain uniform in a chair and reached without thinking for the oldest and stupidest idea in any institution, which is that the people who do the visible, loud work matter, and the people who do the quiet building work are furniture. He had insulted a category. I had just spent all night being the category. And if I burned him down for it, I would win a morning and teach him nothing, and the next plain uniform in the next chair would get the exact same elbow. So we walked, the colonel and I, out of the operations center and into the gray hall where the coffee machine was. And I did not raise my voice, because I never have to. "You didn't insult a woman in a chair, Colonel," I said. "I want you to hear the actual size of what you did, because the apology you gave me was for the small version. You walked into a room full of young officers, and you told all of them, in one sentence, that the people who build the fight don't matter, that the quiet ones are furniture. Some of those young officers are builders. Some of the best ones always are, and this morning they watched their new colonel teach them that if they choose the quiet work, they can expect to be hauled out of a chair by the elbow. That is the thing you actually did. Not to me. I'm fine. I've been fine for 20 years. You did it to them." He took it. I will give him that. He did not flinch, and he did not make an excuse, and a lot of men would have done both. "How do I fix it?" he said. "You don't fix it with me," I said. "You fix it with them. Go be worth the people who build things for you. Start by learning their names before you decide what they're worth." I picked up 2 cups of the terrible coffee and handed him one. because a lesson lands better with a small kindness under it. It's the whole secret, Colonel. Ask the question before you use your hands. It would have saved you this entire morning. He almost smiled. It was not a happy expression, but it was an honest one. Ask the question, he said. Yes, ma'am. I have been called ma'am by a lot of colonels in my life who did not mean it. He meant it. It is a small thing. It is also sometimes everything. Command Sergeant Major B. Trumbull caught me in the hallway on my way back in, and she did it the way she does everything, without ceremony, planting herself in front of me with a cup of the same terrible coffee in her hand. I have known B. Trumbull for 10 years. She is one of the few people in the Army who has watched me work from close enough and for long enough to know exactly what I am. And she has never once treated me like furniture, because senior enlisted leaders who are worth anything learned a long time ago that the quiet person in the plain uniform is very often the person who actually runs the war. She looked at me for a second with those flat, reading eyes, and then she said the truest thing anyone said to me that whole morning. You know what I noticed, ma'am? She said. Your hands. The whole night. From the wall to the chair to the count coming home. I watched your hands the entire time because that is where it shows on people, and yours never moved wrong. Not when he grabbed you. Not when the corridor went hot. Not when the general put the fight on you in front of the room. She took a slow sip. 20 years I've been reading hands. I have seen generals with hands that shook worse than a private's first jump. Yours were the stillest thing in that room, and that room had 11,000 lives in it. That's not luck, ma'am. That's who you are when it's real. I did not have a good answer for that, so I told her the true one. I built the plan, Sergeant Major. It is easy to be still when you already know where every road goes. No, ma'am, she said, and she smiled, which from B. Trumbull is a rare weather event. Plenty of people build the plan and still come apart when the world touches it. Being still is a separate skill. Don't let anybody, including you, pretend it isn't. She started to move off, then stopped, and added, over her shoulder, in the flat way she delivers the things she most means, the general's going to offer you something today. When he does, don't take the shiny one just because a shiny one finally showed up. You've earned the right to want what you actually want. That's the part they never give you. You have to take that part yourself. Then she was gone down the hall, coffee in hand, and I stood there for a moment understanding that she had just told me, 30 seconds before it happened, exactly what was coming and exactly how I was going to feel about it. She is like that. It is why the general keeps her at his shoulder. It is why I have trusted her for a decade. Lieutenant General Denholm found me an hour later when the recovery checklist was done and the crews were accounted for, and the operations center had begun the slow return from crisis to routine that always feels, afterward, a little like coming down a mountain in the dark. He did not do it with an audience. He is not that kind of man. He waited until I was alone at the front table, packing the operation order back into its binder, and he came and stood beside me and looked at the 20-foot map, which now showed a city with all of our people out of it, which is the strangest and best kind of empty. That was the finest piece of operational planning I have watched in 35 years, he said. I want you to hear me say it plainly, because I know how rarely anyone says it to the people who do your job. That was you. Not the room. You. The room flew it, sir, I said, because it was true and because old habits are old. The room flew what you built. He turned and looked at me directly. Claire, I have watched you do this for a decade from the shadows, and I have watched the shadows keep you there, and I am in a position this morning to change that. I can make you very visible. There is a joint billet opening, a senior planning directorate, the kind of job that comes with a spotlight and a fast track and your name on things people actually read. I can put you in it. You have earned it 10 times over, and I would be proud to be the one who finally dragged you into the light. I looked at the empty city on the map for a while before I answered him, because it was a real offer, and it deserved a real answer, and because a part of me, the part that was still my father's daughter, wanted it very badly, wanted to be seen, wanted the name read aloud in rooms for the rest of my career. Can I think about it, sir? I said. You can think about it, he said, but I already know your answer, don't I? He did know. He's a very good commander. He knew before I did. Here is what I did after everyone had gone home. I did not go home. I stayed after the operations center had emptied out, after the young captains had stumbled off to sleep and the majors had filed their reports, and even Command Sergeant Major Trumbull had given me one short nod, which from her is a parade, and gone. The screens were quiet. The 20-foot map still glowed at the front of the room, showing a city we no longer had anyone in. and I sat down, by myself, in the command chair, the chair I had been thrown out of. I want to tell you that it felt like a triumph, sitting in it at last, and it did not, and that is the thing I most want you to understand. It was just a chair. It was a perfectly ordinary office chair with a wobble in one wheel, and sitting in it changed nothing, because it had never been the point. I had not needed to sit in that chair to own that room. I had owned the room the whole time, from against the wall with my folder, because I had built the thing the room was there to serve. The chair was a symbol, and I had spent enough of my life letting other people's symbols tell me what I was worth. I was done with that. I had been done with it, I realized, for longer than I had admitted. I took the small worn photograph out of the corner of my folder, and I looked at it in the glow of the map. My father, Colonel Walter Bannister, 30 years old, in an old uniform, in a year before I was born, squinting into a sun that had set half a century ago. Infantry, a rifleman, the realest army there ever was, by his own lights. And I sat in that quiet room, having just spent a night doing the exact work he never learned to see, and I found that I was not angry at him. I had been angry at him for years, a low background anger I had mistaken for grief. It was gone. What was left was only love, and a kind of peace I had not expected. "I got them out, Dad," I said, out loud to a photograph in an empty room, which is a thing I'm not embarrassed to tell you I did. All of them. 11,000 of them. From the desk. I sat with the photograph a long time, and I thought about all the versions of this night I had rehearsed in my head across 20 years. The version where I say my rank at the brow and watch it land. The version where I let the colonel finish digging his hole and then bury him in it. The version where I take the shiny job and finally have my name read aloud in rooms for the rest of my career. I had wanted all of those versions at different times, with real hunger. And I noticed, sitting in that quiet chair with a dead man's picture in my hand, that not one of them had actually happened, and that I did not miss any of them. Because here's what I finally understood, and it is the thing I had been circling my whole life without landing on. My father was not wrong that the man with the rifle matters. He was only wrong that he is the only thing that matters. And he was wrong in the specific way that almost everyone is wrong, which is that he could see the courage that is loud and fast and visible, the courage of the man running toward the sound, and he could not see the courage that is quiet and slow and invisible, the courage of the woman who spends 9 months of her life protecting strangers from a bad half hour and then stands against a wall while a man throws her out of a chair and does not say a word, because saying the word would not have helped the 11,000 people who were the only thing that mattered. That is courage, too. It is just courage that never looks like anything. It never has a haircut. It never wears a patch. It just gets the ship home in the morning and lets the loud people decide over coffee that it had probably been fine all along. I had spent 42 years waiting for someone with the loud kind of courage to finally recognize the quiet kind in me and to say so out loud in a room. And that morning a general finally had, and it had been sweet. I will not pretend it was not. But sitting alone in the aftermath, I realized that the recognition, when it came, had not actually changed anything inside me. It had only confirmed a thing I already knew. The people who are alive because of you are alive, whether or not anyone says your name. The plan holds whether or not the room understood it while you were building it. My worth had never been sitting in that command chair, waiting for me to be allowed into it. It had been in my hands the whole time, in the arithmetic nobody wanted to hear, in the branch plan folded in the corner of a folder for a night everyone hoped would never come. He would not have fully understood it. That was all right. I had stopped needing him to. That was the thing that had finally shifted in me. Somewhere in the long, quiet 90 minutes of the count coming home, I had stopped needing him, or the colonel, or the army, or anyone, to understand the shape of my worth before I was allowed to believe in it. And the strange thing, the thing nobody tells you, is that the day I stopped needing him to understand was the day I finally became the officer he thought only other people got to be. I tucked the photograph back into its corner. I stood up out of the chair. I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. I gave the general my answer the next morning. I told him no. I told him to give the visible job, the spotlight and the fast track, and the name on things people read to someone who wanted it, because plenty of good officers do want it, and there is no shame in that. And then I told him what I wanted instead, which I had never once, in 20 years, had the nerve to ask for out loud. "Give me the next hard plan, sir," I said. "The next impossible one. That's the work I love. I'm not staying in the shadow because I'm afraid of the light. I looked at the light and I decided I liked the building better, but I want 2 things in return. Name them, Denholm said. I want the planning cell kept together, and I want him. I nodded across the operations center to where Captain Theo Marsh was already at the fusion desk at 7 in the morning, teaching himself the tanker math from the night before because no one had told him to. I want to train him myself, him and the 2 captains at the fusion desk, and the next 10 after them, because the Army is going to keep making brilliant young builders, sir, and right now it is also going to keep teaching them, in rooms like this one, that if they choose the quiet work, they should expect an elbow in a wall. I would like to be the officer who makes sure the Army never mistakes another builder for the coffee girl. That's the job I want. There's no spotlight on it. I don't care. Denholm looked at me for a long moment, and then he did something I had not seen him do the entire operation. He smiled. Approved, he said. All of it. God help me, Claire. That's the easiest decision I'll make all year. There is a coda, and it is small, and I have thought about it more than anything else that happened that week. 3 weeks later, the after-action report came across my desk for signature, and clipped to the front of it, where a formal document has no business carrying a personal note, there was a folded piece of paper in a hand I did not recognize. It was from Colonel Whitlock. It was 3 sentences long. It said that since that morning, he had begun every single brief he ran by naming the officer who built the plan, out loud first, before anything else. It said he had made his whole staff do the same. It said in the last line, "You were right." I asked the question now. I sat with that note for a while. It was the smallest thing. A man reading a name aloud at the top of a meeting. It cost him nothing, and it changed nothing about the past. And it did not undo the elbow or the wall or the word he had used. It was also somehow everything. Because somewhere, in some room I would never sit in, a plain uniform was going to be in a chair doing the quiet work, and a colonel was going to walk in and this time ask the question first. That is how it actually changes. Not in one loud morning, in one small correct habit passed hand to hand until it becomes the water everyone swims in. Captain Marsh put his head in my office door that afternoon. "Ma'am," he said, "there's a new one. They're calling it impossible. Hire wants a planner on it by Friday." He was trying not to grin and failing, the way you fail at that when you are 29 and someone you respect has decided to teach you everything they know. "Good," I said. I pulled up a blank plan on the big screen, the empty white space where the next 9 months would go, where 11,000 more people I would never meet were already, without knowing it, depending on a woman at a desk they would never see. "Sit down, Theo. Let me show you how we start. I want to say one thing to you before I go, and I want to say it to a specific person because I think you might be reading this or listening to it, and I think you might need it. If you are the one who builds the thing that everyone else stands on, if you are the one in the plain clothes, in the plain chair, doing the quiet, careful, invisible work that holds up all the loud, invisible work that gets the applause. If you have watched someone else read your plan aloud and take the credit, and you have swallowed it and gone home and built the next one anyway. If someone has ever looked at you and seen furniture, I want you to hear me because it took me 20 years and a night with 11,000 lives on it to learn this, and I would like to save you some of the time. Your worth was never the chair. It was never the credit or the spotlight or whether the loud man in the doorway could see it. The work is still yours. The people who are alive because of the thing you built are still alive because of you. Whether or not a single soul ever says your name in a room, let them underestimate you. Truly, it is the clearest view you will ever get of what a place is really made of. And then when the night gets hard and the corridor goes hot and the room needs the quiet builder to stand up, let the work tell them the truth. You will not need to raise your voice. You never did. I turned back to the empty plan on the screen and the cursor blinking at the top of all that white space, and I began.